My father has Alzheimer's. He stopped knowing my name 2 years ago. Last month I walked into his room in my uniform. He looked up from his chair, and his eyes went completely clear, and he said, "There she is, my soldier. I knew you'd come back." He was fully present for 11 minutes. I had not heard my name in his voice in 2 years. My name is Rachel. I served 8 years in the United States Marine Corps. 2 tours overseas, the second one 14 months long. I came home from the first tour to a man who hugged me at the airport and held on longer than he usually held on and said almost nothing. I came home from the second tour to a man who was beginning to lose things. I want to tell you about him the way he was before, because the before matters, and because the disease has a way of becoming the whole story, when it should only be the last chapter. My father's name is Gerald. He grew up in Pittsburgh and worked 30 years at a machine shop and coached Little League for 12 of those years, and had a specific way of laughing at his own jokes before he finished telling them, which should have been annoying, and was instead one of the most comforting sounds I have ever known. He was not a complicated man. He was a steady man, the kind of man who shows up, the kind of man who fixes what is broken without being asked and sits in the room without being invited and drives you somewhere you need to go, even when he disagrees with where you are going. He did not want me to enlist. He said it plainly and directly, the way he said everything, without drama, without negotiation. "Rachel, I don't want you to do this." I said, "Dad, I need to." He said, "I know, I still don't want you to." And then he drove me to the recruiter's office because that was also who he was. A man who showed up even for the things he didn't choose and wouldn't have chosen. He drove me to basic. He drove 4 hours each way, and he didn't say much on the way there, and he didn't say much dropping me off. He hugged me once, firmly, and then he stepped back and looked at me with an expression I could not fully read, and he said, "Write to your mother." The night before I shipped out, he sat across from me at the kitchen table for an hour and a half. We talked about baseball. We talked about a movie we had both seen. We talked about the neighbor's new fence. At the end, he pushed back his chair and stood up, and he said, "I am very proud of you." And then he went to bed before I could say anything back. He had never said that to me before. I carried those 6 words overseas both times, somewhere behind everything, the training and the long days and the longer nights and the things I am not going to talk about in this particular story. I carried that sentence. "I am very proud of you," said once, standing at a kitchen table, before he went to bed. The second tour was the hard one. 14 months. I came home different in the ways you come home different, which is a thing you understand from the inside and cannot explain from the outside. My father was different too by then, though it took me a few visits to understand what I was seeing. The small hesitations, the way he'd reach for a word and come up empty and then move past it so smoothly you almost didn't notice. The way he'd look at me sometimes for just a fraction of a second too long, like he was double-checking something he was no longer certain of. The diagnosis came 8 months after I got home from the second tour. I re-enlisted anyway. I am not going to pretend that was a simple decision, or that I have made my full peace with it. My mother was still alive and managing, and she told me to go. She said, "Your father would want you to serve your commitment. Your father would not want you to stop for him." She was right about what he would want, and I do not know if being right about what someone would want is the same as making the right choice. I still think about that. I came home on leave 4 times in the 3 years that followed. Each time, more of him was somewhere else. He stopped knowing the names of the neighbors he'd known for 20 years. He stopped remembering the score of games he'd watched the week before. He stopped, eventually, knowing my brother's name. My mother died in the third year. Heart failure. She had been managing everything. And then she was gone, and my brother took over, and I came home for the funeral on emergency leave. And I stood in the reception line in my dress uniform, and my father looked at me and said, "You look like my daughter." I said, "I am your daughter, Dad." He said, "Of course you are, of course." He did not know me that day. I think he knew something. Something familiar and important, but not my name, not the specific fact of who I was. I flew back to base 4 days later, and I did not let myself think too hard about what I was flying away from. He stopped knowing my name 18 months after my mother died. I retired 6 weeks ago. 23 when I enlisted, 31 when I retired. 8 years, 2 tours, more hours in places I cannot describe than I know how to account for. I drove straight from the base to the care facility, still in my dress uniform, because I had not had time to change, and because some part of me, some part I had not planned for and did not examine too closely, wanted him to see me in it. My brother met me in the parking lot. He said, "He's been having a hard week. He probably won't know you today. I just want you to be ready." I said, "I know. I'm ready." I was not ready. The room is small. A window that looks out at a garden that is tended carefully by the facility staff. A chair that is positioned at the exact angle my father prefers. A small television he rarely watches. Photographs on the dresser that the staff have told us help some patients, but that my father looks at with polite unrecognition, as if they are pictures of someone he once knew slightly. He was in the chair. The late afternoon light was coming through the window, and it caught the brass buttons on my dress uniform, and my father looked up. He looked at me. I have seen his face in all the stages of this disease. I have seen the good day face and the bad day face and the frightened face and the face of someone who is very far away and the face of someone who is trying very hard to come back. I know all of them now. This was none of them. This was his face, the face I grew up with, the face from the kitchen table and the baseball games and the 4 jokes told in the same order at every family dinner. Fully present, fully him. He said, "There she is, my soldier. I knew you'd come back." I sat down on the floor. I do not mean this as a figure of speech. I sat on the floor at my father's feet, in my dress uniform, because my legs made a decision I had not participated in. I was on the floor, and my father reached down and put his hand on my head, the specific weight of his hand that I have known since I was a child, the same hand. And I pressed my face against his knee, and I did not make a sound because I had no sound left. He said, "How long have you been gone?" I said, "A long time." He said, "I know. I kept track." I looked up at him. He was looking at me with complete clarity. Not the performing kind, not the confused kind, just the real kind. My father looking at his daughter. I said, "Dad." I said, "I missed you." He said, "I missed you too, every single day." In 11 minutes, my father said more than he had said to me in 8 years of service. He asked if I was all right, and when I said yes, he said, "You always say that," and he was right. He asked about the Marines, and I told him I was done. I was home. I was staying, and he nodded like this was the correct answer. He asked if I had been eating, the specific question of a man who expressed care through the monitoring of practical things. And I said yes, and he said, "Good, because you look thin." And I said, "Dad, I'm fine." And he said, "I know you're fine. I just like to say it." And then near the end, with the light still on his face and his hand still resting on my knee, he said, "I was wrong." I said, "About what?" He said, "About you going. I spent a lot of years being afraid of what would happen to you, but I watched you become something." I watched you become someone who goes toward the hard things instead of away from them. Your mother always said it was already in her before she ever signed a piece of paper. I didn't want to believe her because believing her meant I had to stop being afraid and just be proud. And being proud is harder than being afraid. Did you know that? I said, I think I do, he said. I should have said it more. More than once, more than one night at a kitchen table. I said, once was enough, Dad. I carried it both times. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, good, good. That's what I needed to hear. 11 minutes. My brother was timing it from the doorway. He has learned to track the windows, how long they last, what brings them on, what ends them. 11 minutes, he said afterward, and he said it the way you say something that is both a mercy and an ending. His eyes changed, not sharply, not dramatically, the light turning down. He looked at me with the kind, mildly curious expression of a man who is not sure who is in his room, but is not troubled by it either. He said, Are you visiting today? I said, Yes, I wanted to see you. He said, How nice. Do you know my daughter? She's in the Marines. I said, I've heard of her. I think she's doing well. He said, I think so too. She writes good letters. I sat on the floor for a long time after that. My brother came and sat beside me, and we didn't speak. The light moved across the floor the way it does in late afternoon, slow and golden, and my father watched the garden through the window. I have thought every day about those 11 minutes since, about what the uniform did, why the brass buttons on a dress uniform reached something that my voice and my face and my presence every week for 2 years had not reached. The neuroscience of it is partial and uncertain, the same way everything about this disease is partial and uncertain. Something about deep encoding, something about things learned young, stamped in early, surviving longer than the things that came after. Whatever the reason, his brain still knew a soldier's uniform. His brain still knew his daughter in one. I put the uniform on again last Sunday. It had not worked the week before or the week before that. He looked at me with the same kind unrecognition. But I put it on again because I do not know when the window will come, and I want to be ready when it does. I want him to look up and see the brass buttons and have that half second where something in him that is still completely him comes back to the surface. He said once was enough. I carried it both times. I am carrying it now. I visit every Tuesday and every Saturday. I sit in the chair across from his chair. I hold his hand when he lets me. I tell him about things that happened in my day, and he listens with that gentle attention that is still his, still entirely his, even when he does not know who is speaking. Sometimes he tells me things too, fragments, pieces of a life I recognize. A baseball game from 30 years ago described in vivid detail. The name of a dog we had when I was 8 that I had nearly forgotten. A joke, one of the 4, told with the same timing he always used, the laugh starting before the punchline the way it always did. The disease takes so much. It does not take everything. What it cannot reach, what I have come to understand it genuinely cannot reach, is the deepest layer of who a person is. The kindness is still there. The steadiness is still there. He still says, thank you to the nurses when they bring his medication. He still holds the door when someone is coming through behind him, even though he cannot always remember where doors lead. He still laughs at his own jokes. He is still Gerald. He is just Gerald from very far away. I told my brother about the 11 minutes in detail, all of it, every word. He had been there for parts of it, but not all of it, and he listened the way my brother listens, which is carefully and without interruption. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, Then he said, he talked about you even on the bad days. Not by name. He stopped knowing your name, but he'd say, my daughter, the Marine. Or he'd say, she's serving. He'd say it like it was something that made him calm, like it was something he was holding on to. I did not know that. I think about it now. My father in the somewhere else, holding on to my daughter, the Marine, not as a name or a face or a specific memory, but as a thing he was proud of, a thing he was keeping safe. He kept me even when he lost me. He said, out of nowhere last week, in the middle of nothing, he said, you remind me of someone. I said, who? He said, someone brave. I did not tell him. I just held his hand. He said once was enough at a kitchen table 23 years ago. I carried it to 2 wars. I am carrying it still. He is in his chair by the window. I will be there Tuesday. I always come back. I always will.